For as long as I can remember, my workshop had always been strictly off-limits to everyone. When my son's girlfriend suddenly began showing interest in what she called my boring old documents, I responded by installing a keypad lock on the door, secured with a code that only I knew. 3 weeks later, while I was sitting in a doctor's office for a routine appointment, my phone rang. It was Daniel. He sounded frantic, his voice trembling. "Dad." She got in. She broke into the workshop. She took photos of everything, and now she's saying. His words trailed off before he could finish. But I didn't need him to. I already knew what he meant. Because ever since the day I first met Madison Chen, I had quietly been preparing myself for exactly this moment. But I should start from the beginning. My name is Robert. I'm 65 years old, and I spent 4 decades working as an aerospace engineer before retiring 5 years ago. My wife Sarah passed away 7 years back after a long fight with cancer. Since then, life has been simple and quiet. Just me and my son Daniel under the same roof. Daniel's 30 now, and works as a civil engineer for the county. He's a good man, responsible, hard-working. If anything, he's a little too trusting. But that's because Sarah and I raised him to believe the best about people. About 6 months ago, Daniel returned from a work conference in Austin, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. "Dad, I met someone," he said, practically glowing as he pulled out his phone to show me pictures. Her name was Madison Chen, 28 years old, with the kind of bright smile that could probably convince anyone of anything. According to her, she worked as an interior designer specializing in luxury residential spaces. She and Daniel had struck up a conversation at the hotel bar during the conference and apparently hit it off right away. 2 weeks later, she drove down from Austin to visit him. A month after that, weekend visits had become a routine. By the 3rd month, Daniel sat me down and asked if Madison could stay with us for a while. "Just temporarily, Dad," he explained. "We're trying to save for a house. Rent in Austin is draining her finances, and she can do her job remotely. If we both tighten our budgets and save hard for 6 months, we should have enough for a down payment." I wanted to refuse right then and there. Interior designers working on upscale projects in Austin shouldn't be struggling to cover their rent. Still, when I looked at my son and saw the excitement written all over his face, I couldn't help but think about Sarah. She would have said yes without hesitation. I could almost hear her voice in my head. "Give her a chance, Robert. Not everyone is hiding something." So I agreed, and that's when everything truly began. Madison moved in on a Saturday in April. For someone relocating from another city, she showed up with surprisingly little. Just 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and a couple of small boxes. When I raised an eyebrow, she smiled and explained, "I sold most of my furniture. Going minimalist. You know, fresh start." The first week passed smoothly. She was polite, even thoughtful. She'd offer to help with dinner, often complimenting whatever I cooked. At first she called me Mr. Parker, until I finally told her to just call me Robert. During the day she worked from the guest room, which quickly turned into her home office. In the evenings she and Daniel would cook together, watch movies, and behave like any young couple enjoying the early days of a relationship. But I started noticing things. At first they were small details that were easy to dismiss. She asked a lot of questions about the house. Not the typical ones like where the coffee filters were, or which cabinet held the plates. Her questions were different. "How long have you owned this place? What's the property value around here these days? Do you own any other properties?" Daniel brushed it off whenever I mentioned it. "She works close to real estate, Dad," he said with a laugh. "She just thinks about stuff like that." Then her curiosity shifted toward my workshop. Out back, there's a detached garage that I converted into a workshop years ago. That's where I keep my tools, my drafting table, and several filing cabinets filled with old project notes and personal documents. It's my space. Sarah used to jokingly call it my man cave, though I've never liked that phrase. It's not about hiding away from the world. It's simply a place where I can think clearly. I've always kept the door locked, not because there's anything suspicious inside, but because it's private, and some of the documents in there are important. One evening, about 2 weeks after Madison had moved in, she casually asked, "So what exactly do you keep in that garage, Robert?" Daniel chuckled and said, "You never let anyone go in there," she said. It's just old engineering materials, I replied casually. Nothing exciting. Some outdated paperwork, tools I barely touch anymore. Could I take a look sometime? She asked with a friendly smile. I love seeing how people organize their workspaces. Sometimes it even gives me design inspiration. It really wouldn't impress you, I said, brushing it off. She kept smiling, but for a brief moment something shifted in her eyes. Daniel jumped in with a grin. Yeah, Dad acts like it's some classified government lab. What are you hiding in there, a secret car collection? I shook my head while he laughed. Dad wishes, Daniel joked. It's probably just stacks of old blueprints and tax files. I didn't bother correcting him, even though that wasn't the whole story. After Sarah passed away, I buried myself in work more than ever. One of the final projects I handled before retiring involved designing a specialized valve system for commercial HVAC equipment. The design made the systems more efficient, extended their lifespan, and reduced manufacturing costs. In 2019, I applied for a patent, and it was officially approved in 2020, just before I stepped away from my career. What I never shared with Daniel, what I had never told him at all, was that the patent ended up being licensed by 3 major HVAC manufacturers. The royalties averaged around $18,000 every month, sometimes even more depending on production numbers. Over the past 5 years, that income had quietly grown into a little over $1 million sitting across several investment accounts. I lived a simple life. I didn't need much. The house was already paid off, and my pension easily handled my regular expenses. The money from the patent just kept building, quietly growing in the background for Daniel's future, even though I hadn't yet decided the exact way I'd eventually pass it on to him. Sarah and I had always imagined helping him someday, contributing toward a house, a wedding, maybe even college funds for future grandchildren. But after she died, I never revisited those plans. I simply left the money where it was, waiting for the right moment. Every document tied to that money was stored in my workshop. The original patent application, the licensing contracts, the quarterly royalty reports, the statements from the investment accounts, everything sat neatly organized inside a filing cabinet out there. And I had never told Daniel about any of it, because if I'm honest, I was afraid that the moment he knew how much money was sitting there, he might lose the drive that had always pushed him to work so hard. I was afraid someone might eventually take advantage of him, afraid that money would change the relationship we had built over the years. To Daniel, I was simply his father living off a pension, and I preferred it that way. But now Madison had started asking questions. About a week later, I caught her standing at the workshop door, trying the handle. When she heard my footsteps behind her, she spun around quickly, clearly startled. Oh, Robert, I thought I heard a sound in there, like beeping or something. Probably just the smoke detector in the house with a low battery, I said calmly. She nodded with a polite smile. Right, of course. That same evening, I drove to the Home Depot and picked up a keypad lock, the kind that requires a 6-digit code to open. The next morning, while Daniel and Madison were out, I installed it on the workshop door. When they returned home later that day, Daniel noticed it immediately. Dad, what's with the new lock? Been hearing about break-ins around the neighborhood, I replied, lying smoothly. Just being careful with my tools. Some of them are worth a bit. Madison reached out and lightly touched the keypad. Fancy, she said. What's the code? Only something I need to know, I answered casually, keeping my voice relaxed. You two wouldn't have any reason to dig through my boring old paperwork anyway. Daniel shrugged, clearly unconcerned. But Madison didn't move right away. Her eyes stayed on that keypad for a moment longer than necessary. Over the following month, the situation began to change little by little. Madison started bringing up money more often in casual conversation. You know, Robert, she said one afternoon, homes in this area are selling for at least $850,000 right now. Have you ever thought about downsizing? Another time she mentioned, Daniel, your dad could probably take out a reverse mortgage and live extremely comfortably. Soon she began suggesting renovations. This kitchen really deserves an upgrade, she told us one evening. I could design something incredible. It could easily raise the property value by another $100,000. Then she started asking Daniel direct questions about my finances. I know because he mentioned it to me himself. Madison was wondering if you have life insurance, Dad, he said. I told him, I really don't know much about your financial situation. Then I added, but you're doing all right, aren't you? I'm fine, son. I reassured him. My pension covers everything I need. You don't have to worry about me. But the truth was, I was worried, just not about myself. I was worried about him. So I did what most cautious fathers would do in 2024. I searched her name online. Madison Chen, interior designer, Austin, Texas. A website appeared in the results, but it immediately struck me as suspicious. It looked freshly built, full of stock images, vague descriptions of luxury projects, and not a single genuine client testimonial. Her profile on LinkedIn showed she'd worked at 3 different design firms over the past 5 years. But when I looked closer, the employment dates didn't quite line up. There were unexplained gaps between them. I kept digging. Her Instagram page showed plenty of glamorous photos, dinners at upscale restaurants, stays in expensive hotels, designer clothes, but almost nothing that actually demonstrated her work as a designer. And something about the numbers didn't add up. She had nearly 15,000 followers, yet her posts barely received 30 likes each. That kind of imbalance usually means the followers were purchased. Then I stumbled onto something else. A post from 2 years earlier on Reddit. It was in a relationship advice thread. The username had been deleted, but someone had archived the conversation. The story came from a man in Houston describing how his fiancée had persuaded him to add her name to his investment accounts for emergencies. Not long after, the accounts were emptied, and she vanished without a trace. The physical description sounded exactly like Madison. The timeline matched too. And the woman in that story had used a different last name. Chen might not even be her real one. The next morning, I contacted a private investigator. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was my son's life. I needed to know the truth. While I waited for the investigator's report, I began preparing. I photographed every single document stored in my workshop. Then I created encrypted digital copies of all of them. The most critical paperwork I moved into a safe deposit box at the bank. After that, I updated my will. I made it very clear that the patent rights and every asset connected to them would eventually belong to Daniel, but through a structured trust that would distribute the money gradually over 10 years. No large lump sum. No opportunity for a future spouse to walk away with half of it in a divorce. When I explained the plan to my attorney, he paused before saying, Robert. Madison Chen, whose real name turned out to be Madison Lewis, had quite a past. Over the previous 6 years, she had been engaged 3 separate times. Each fiancé had been a man who was financially comfortable. In every case, she had pushed for a quick wedding, encouraged joint bank accounts, and tried to gain access to their assets. 2 of those engagements ended after the men discovered money missing from their accounts. The report also showed she carried more than $75,000 in credit card debt and had declared bankruptcy 4 years earlier. And most disturbing of all, she was extremely skilled at identifying men with money. I sat at my kitchen table reading those pages, feeling a heavy knot form in my stomach. My son, my kind, trusting son, was living under the same roof as a professional con artist. But simply handing Daniel the report wouldn't solve anything. He was deeply in love. If I confronted him with it, he'd probably think I was trying to control his life or sabotage his relationship. From his perspective, it might look like I'd hired someone just to dig up dirt on the woman he cared about. I needed Madison to expose herself. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait very long. The following Wednesday, I had a routine doctor's appointment scheduled. A simple checkup. Nothing serious. I left the house around 9 in the morning and told everyone I'd probably be back by 11. Madison knew about it. That morning she had casually asked, "Will you be gone long, Robert?" "Just a couple of hours," I told her. What I didn't mention was that the clinic ended up moving my appointment earlier. I was finished by 10. When I pulled into the driveway, something immediately felt wrong. The door to my workshop was slightly open. The keypad lock I'd installed had been ripped completely off the wall, the wiring hanging loose where it had been torn out. And through the open doorway, I could see Madison standing inside, using her phone to photograph the documents spread across my desk. For a moment, I just stood there in the driveway, staring in disbelief at what I was seeing. Then I pulled out my phone and called Daniel. "Dad, what's going on?" he answered. I'm in the middle of a meeting. You need to come home right now. What? Why? Is everything okay? Your girlfriend broke into my workshop. She's inside taking pictures of my private documents. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Dad, that's crazy, Daniel finally said. Madison wouldn't. Daniel, I'm standing outside looking at her through the window, I cut in. Come home. Now. 20 minutes later, Daniel's truck came tearing into the driveway, the brakes squealing as he stopped. Madison was sitting on the porch steps, clutching her phone tightly in both hands. Her eyes were red, tears running down her cheeks. Daniel, she cried, rushing toward him the moment he stepped out of the truck. Your dad is accusing me of insane things. The door was open, and I thought I heard something inside. The door wasn't open, I said firmly. She tore the keypad right off the wall. Daniel glanced toward the workshop. The broken lock and dangling wires were impossible to miss. His face slowly drained of color. Madison. What? He said quietly. Why would you do that? Because your father is hiding something, she snapped suddenly, the tears stopping as quickly as they had started. He's got money he's not telling you about, she continued sharply. I saw the statements in there. He's sitting on more than $1 million while you're struggling to save for a house. He's letting us live here like we're broke when he could. Could what? I asked calmly. Could give you access to it, she shot back. She looked straight at me then. And for the first time I saw her without the polite smile or the friendly act. The mask had completely disappeared. It's going to be Daniel's eventually anyway, she said. So why are you hoarding it? Do you realize what we could do with that kind of money? We could buy a house right now. We could invest. Daniel interrupted. His voice sounded different now. Madison, he said slowly, that's my dad's money. He earned it. Why would you think we have any right to it? Daniel asked. Because we're getting married, she blurted out. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, before she realized what she'd just said. We are? Daniel asked quietly. She quickly tried to recover. I just thought, we've been together for 6 months, we're living together. I assumed we were moving toward. You assumed, I interrupted, that you'd marry my son, gain access to his inheritance, and then what? Madison. I paused for a second before adding, or should I say, Madison Lewis. Her expression shifted instantly. How do you? I hired a private investigator, I said evenly. I know about Houston. I know about the engagement ring you pawned. I know about the man in Dallas whose savings account suddenly disappeared. Should I keep going? Daniel was staring at her like he was looking at a stranger. Madison, is that true? He asked. She started crying again, but this time the tears looked different, less controlled, more frantic. Those were misunderstandings, she said quickly. Those men, it was complicated. But with you, Daniel, it's different. I really do love. Stop, he said. His voice cracked slightly. Just stop talking. Then he looked over at me. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I replied quietly. You had to see it for yourself. Madison suddenly straightened up, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Fine, she snapped. Fine, you win, Robert. But you know what? You're going to end up dying alone in this house, clinging to your money, and Daniel's going to resent you forever for destroying his relationship. Get out, Daniel said. What? Get out of my father's house. Now. Daniel, baby, please, she pleaded. We can talk about this. Now, he repeated. She flinched at the firmness in his voice. For a moment she looked like she might argue again, but instead she turned and walked past us into the house, still holding her phone. A few seconds later we heard drawers slamming in the guest room as she began throwing her belongings into her suitcases. 20 minutes later she hauled her suitcases out to her car, a BMW she had claimed was leased through her job, and drove off without looking back. Daniel and I remained standing in the driveway, the quiet between us growing heavier by the second. After a long moment he finally spoke. I'm so stupid. No, I said gently. You're trusting. There's a difference. I let her into our home, he said. I defended her. But you didn't, I interrupted. And that's what matters. He glanced toward the workshop. Is it true? He asked. You really have over $1 million saved? It came from a patent I developed, I explained. It brings in royalty income every month. I've been setting the money aside for your future. I just hadn't decided the best way to structure it yet. And you didn't tell me, he said slowly, because you thought I'd turn into her. No, I replied, shaking my head. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to build your own life first, on your own terms, without anyone, even me, using money to influence your choices. I paused before continuing. Your mother and I always believed you should make your own way first, establish your career, become the person you're meant to be. Then later, once you're settled and secure in who you are, that's when help should come, not as something you were waiting for, but as a gift. Daniel lowered himself onto the porch steps and buried his face in his hands. 6 months, he muttered. I wasted 6 months on someone who only saw me as a paycheck. I sat down beside him. No, I said quietly. You spent 6 months learning an important lesson. It's better to learn it now than after a wedding. Better now than after giving her power of attorney or putting her name on a bank account. He lifted his head slightly. Did you suspect something from the beginning? He asked. I suspected, I admitted, but I didn't know for sure. That's why I started looking into it. And I'm sorry if that meant invading your privacy. Don't apologize, he said immediately. You saved me. We sat there together in silence for a while. Eventually he spoke again. The patent, the money, he began. Can I ask what you're planning to do with it? He said. Well, I replied, I've been thinking about helping you buy a house, a real one, something in your name only, and I'd set up a trust that sends you quarterly payments over the next 10 years. Not enough to make you stop working, but enough to make life a little easier. Does that sound fair? That's when he started crying. Not the kind that comes from sadness. More like the kind that happens when everything finally releases at once. I don't deserve you as a dad, he said. Yes, you do, I told him. And your mom would be proud of the way you handled this. You listened. Once the truth came out, you didn't let love blind you. I loved her, he said quietly. I know, I answered. Or at least you believed you did. When you're in the middle of it, those two things feel exactly the same. 3 months later, Daniel finalized the purchase of a 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. Even though I offered to cover the entire down payment, he insisted on putting down 20% from his own savings. Instead, I gave him a gift by paying the first year of his mortgage. He eventually started dating again, though this time he moved much more cautiously. He even joined one of those apps that runs background checks on users. And most importantly, he stopped rushing things. As for me, I hired a professional to replace the keypad lock on my workshop with something even more secure. A biometric system that only opens with my thumbprint. But I also made another decision. One evening, I sat down with Daniel and laid everything out in front of him. The patent paperwork, the licensing contracts, the investment statements, every document. No more secrets, I told him. You're 30 years old. You deserve to understand what your future might look like. He looked through the stack quietly, taking it all in. Then he said something that made me realize I'd raised him the right way. Dad, this is your money. He said, you earned it. I'm grateful that you want to help me. But I don't want you to feel like you have to give me anything. I've got a good job. I'll be all right. I know you will, I replied. But I still want to help. That's what fathers do. Just last week, Daniel brought someone new over to meet me. Her name is Claire. She works as a teacher. She drives a 10-year-old Honda. When she saw the house, the first thing she complimented was my garden, not the value of the property. When I mentioned that I used to work as an engineer before retiring, she asked what project I had enjoyed the most, not how much money I had made. And during the entire evening, she didn't ask a single question about my finances. I liked her immediately. After dinner, once she had gone home, Daniel turned to me and asked, So, what do you think? I think she asked how your day was before anything else, I said. I think she insisted on bringing dessert, even after I told her not to bring anything, and I think she has very kind eyes. He smiled. Yeah, she does. Take your time with this one, I told him. I will. I still keep my workshop locked, not because I don't trust my son, but because some habits are hard to break. And honestly, after everything with Madison, I feel like I've earned the right to have one place that belongs only to me. But now when Daniel visits, I sometimes let him step inside and show him what I'm working on. Small projects, sketches, little ideas that keep my mind busy. Every now and then I find myself thinking about Sarah and how she would have handled things. She probably would have reminded me that saying yes when Daniel asked if Madison could move in had actually been the right decision. Because if I had refused, if I had tried to forbid it, Daniel might have moved out with her anyway. He might have married her without ever discovering who she truly was. Sometimes the best way to protect someone isn't by stopping them from making mistakes. Sometimes it's letting them make those mistakes in a place where you're close enough to catch them when they fall. Daniel learned something important from all of this. He learned what warning signs look like. He learned that real love doesn't come with a price tag attached. He learned that someone who truly cares about you will respect your family, respect your privacy, and want to build a future together instead of taking what already exists. Those aren't lessons I could have taught him myself. Madison taught him. In a strange way, she may have done us both a favor, but I'm still keeping that workshop locked. If this story made you think, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to A Father's Wrath for more unforgettable lessons and real-life drama. Lenti what out to be, and what hunta be cool, at with you ready to be cool.